The train hissed as it pulled away, leaving behind a cloud of steam that quickly dissolved into the gray winter air. Eliza Mayfield stood on the wooden platform with her small suitcase at her feet, watching until the iron beast disappeared down the tracks. That was the moment she truly understood she had been left behind. Christmas Eve in a frontier town was not the gentle, candlelit celebration she had imagined during the long journey west. It was cold, unforgiving, and indifferent to a young woman who had trusted a promise written in careful ink. Eliza had come as a mail-order bride, carrying nothing but a few dresses, a Bible with her mother's name written inside, and the hope that marriage would offer safety. The letters from her intended husband had been polite, even kind. He spoke of land, of a steady life, of a woman's place beside him. Each word had sounded like rescue. Yet now, as dusk settled and snow began to drift from the sky, there was no man waiting for her, no smile, no coat draped over her shoulders, no warm home. A porter pointed her toward a boarding house near the edge of town, the kind that rented beds by the night and patients by the hour. Inside, the air smelled of boiled cabbage and coal smoke. Eliza paid her last coins for a single night, knowing full well she had no way to pay for another. The woman who ran the place looked at her with thinly veiled suspicion, as if Eliza's loneliness were something contagious. The room she was given was barely more than a closet, a narrow bed, a chipped wash basin, and a single window that rattled with every gust of wind. Eliza sat on the mattress, smoothing her gloves again and again, a habit she had developed to keep from crying. She told herself the man might still come. Perhaps there had been trouble with his horse. Perhaps the storm had slowed him down. Hope, thin as it was, clung to her like a second skin. By evening, the sounds of the boarding house changed. Laughter echoed from downstairs, and the smell of roasted meat drifted up the stairs, cruel in its richness. Eliza's stomach twisted painfully. She had not eaten since morning, choosing to save her coins for shelter instead of food. She pressed her hands against her belly and bowed her head, whispering a prayer not for abundance, but simply to endure the night. As the hours passed, no knock came at the door. No footsteps hurried up the stairs calling her name. Outside, church bells rang faintly, marking Christmas Eve. Eliza thought of her childhood home, of her mother lighting candles and humming hymns, of warmth and certainty. Here, she wrapped herself in her thin coat and lay down fully dressed, afraid that if she slept too deeply, she might not wake. In the quiet, shame crept in beside the hunger. She wondered if she had been foolish to believe in letters and promises from a stranger. In this town, she was nobody's wife, nobody's responsibility, just a girl who had crossed the country for a future that never arrived. As midnight approached, Eliza stared at the ceiling and made a silent vow. If morning came, she would find work any work. She would survive, even if it meant scrubbing floors or sleeping in barns. She would not let this night be the end of her story. What she did not know, as snow thickened outside and footsteps echoed faintly below, was that this cold Christmas Eve was about to become the turning point of her life. Morning broke slowly over the frontier town, the sky pale and colorless beneath a heavy quilt of snow. Christmas Day arrived without celebration for most, but for Colehart it came with a familiar weight. He rode in before sunrise, his horse's hooves crunching against the frozen ground as the town emerged from the storm. Cole was not a man who enjoyed holidays. They reminded him too much of what he had lost and of the quiet ranch that waited for him beyond the hills. Cole had a reputation in town, though he never sought one. Folks knew him as steady, dependable, and distant. He owned a spread several miles out, worked hard, paid his debts, and kept his word. He spoke little, listened more, and avoided trouble when he could. After losing his parents and later his young wife to sickness years before, he had learned to live without expecting much from the world. He tied his horse outside the general store and stamped snow from his boots. Inside, the stove glowed red, and a handful of townsfolk gathered close, trading news in low voices. Cole picked up flour, coffee, and feed, nodding in greeting but saying little. It was as he waited at the counter that he caught a fragment of conversation that made him pause. "Mail order bride," someone muttered. "Poor thing, left her there all night. Christmas Eve of all times. Heard the man never showed. No money, no family. Boarding house won't keep her." Cole's hand tightened around the edge of the counter. He had heard stories like that before. Women promised stability only to be discarded when reality proved inconvenient. Usually, he pushed such things aside. The world was full of sorrow. A man could drown in it if he wasn't careful. But something about this one stayed with him. He asked one simple question, his voice low. "Where is she?" The shopkeeper glanced at him, surprised. "Staying over at Miller's boarding house." Or was. "Not sure how much longer they'll have her." Cole nodded, paid for his supplies, and stepped back into the cold. Snowflakes drifted down, slow and heavy. He mounted his horse but didn't turn toward the trail that would lead him home. Instead, he guided the reins toward town. Miller's boarding house sat hunched like an old woman at the edge of the street, paint peeling, windows fogged with age and cold. Cole dismounted and stood there for a moment, unsure of what he intended to do. He told himself he would simply check on her, make sure she had food. That was all. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. Inside, the boarding house was quiet, most guests either asleep or gone for the day. The woman at the desk looked up warily as Cole removed his hat. He asked about the girl, describing her as best he could. The woman hesitated, then jerked her chin toward the stairs. "She's got until noon," she said flatly. "After that, I need the room." Cole thanked her and climbed the narrow steps. Each creak of the stairs echoed in the silence, and with every step, a strange sense of responsibility settled in his chest. He stopped at a closed door and knocked once, firm but not unkind. Inside, Eliza startled awake. Fear gripped her before she even reached the door. When she opened it, she found a tall man standing there, snow clinging to his coat, his eyes steady and serious. He looked nothing like the gentle figure she had imagined from letters, and yet something in his presence felt solid real. Eliza stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, as if the floor beneath her might give way. The man who had introduced himself as Cole Hart filled the narrow hallway with his quiet presence. He wasn't smiling, but there was no hardness in his eyes either, only a steady calm that made her suddenly aware of how tired she was of being afraid. "I don't need charity," Eliza said softly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Pride was one of the few things hunger hadn't taken from her. Cole nodded once as though he'd expected the answer. "I'm not offering charity." That caught her off guard. She studied him more closely now, the worn leather of his coat, the snow melting along the brim of his hat, the way he stood like a man accustomed to making decisions and seeing them through. He didn't look like someone who acted on impulse, and that somehow made his presence more unsettling. "The woman downstairs says you've got until noon," he continued. "That doesn't give you much time." Eliza's throat tightened. She had known it already, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way she hadn't allowed herself to face. She glanced back into the small room, the narrow bed, the empty basin, the suitcase that held everything she owned. This place had never been home, yet leaving it felt like stepping off the edge of something with no idea what waited below. "I was planning to find work," she said. "Anything I can do. I won't be a burden." Cole's jaw tightened slightly, and for the first time she saw a flicker of emotion cross his face, something like restrained anger, though not at her. "You shouldn't have to beg for the right to eat," he said. His voice remained even, but the conviction behind it was unmistakable. He paused, then spoke the words that would change everything. "Get up. Gather your things. You're coming home with me." Eliza stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You're home?" she asked. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Cole replied. "I know you were promised something and left with nothing. I know it's Christmas morning, and you shouldn't be facing the cold alone." Fear warred with relief inside her chest. She had followed a stranger once already, guided by hopeful letters and polite words. That choice had brought her to this moment hungry, ashamed, and unwanted. Yet something about Cole's offer was different. There were no promises of marriage, no flowery reassurances. Just a simple statement, delivered as fact. "What would you expect of me?" she asked carefully. "Nothing," he answered without hesitation. "You'll have a roof, food, and time to decide what comes next. That's all." Eliza searched his face for signs of deception and found none. Instead, she saw weariness that matched her own, and a quiet resolve that suggested he would stand by his word. Slowly, she nodded. She moved to the bed and knelt to retrieve her suitcase, her hands shaking as she fastened the worn clasp. Each movement felt unreal, as though she were watching herself from a distance. When she stood again, Cole stepped aside, giving her space, a small gesture that spoke louder than any reassurance. They descended the stairs together, the boarding house keeper watching them with narrowed eyes. Cole paid her without comment, then held the door open for Eliza. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean, and Eliza pulled her coat tighter around herself. Outside, a wagon waited, sturdy and plain. Cole helped her up, careful not to touch her unless necessary. As they started down the snow-covered road, Eliza looked back once at the boarding house, at the place where she had spent the loneliest night of her life. She didn't know what awaited her at Coalhart's ranch. She didn't know if this decision would lead to safety or sorrow. But as the wagon rolled forward and the town faded behind them, one truth settled deep in her heart. For the first time since stepping off the train, she was no longer standing still. The wagon creaked as it moved beyond the edge of town, its wooden wheels cutting shallow tracks through the fresh snow. Eliza sat stiffly on the bench, her gloved hands folded in her lap, afraid that if she relaxed even a little, the strange steadiness holding her together might crumble. Beside her, Cole guided the reins with quiet focus, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence wasn't uncomfortable so much as uncertain, like two strangers sharing shelter from the same storm, unsure which questions were safe to ask. The wind carried the smell of pine and frozen earth, sharp and clean compared to the stale air of the boarding house. Eliza breathed it in deeply, as if it might strengthen her. After a while, the town disappeared completely, replaced by open land and rolling hills dusted white. Eliza had never seen such wide emptiness before. Back east, there were always fences, houses, signs of people everywhere. Here, the world felt vast and exposed, and she felt small within it. "You don't have to stay," Cole said at last, breaking the silence. "Once we reach the ranch, you can rest. When the weather clears, I'll take you wherever you want to go." Eliza turned toward him, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. The question had been burning in her chest since they left town. Cole was quiet for a moment. "Because I know what it's like," he said finally. "To lose what you thought your life was supposed to be. And because I couldn't ride past knowing you were left with nothing." His answer was simple, but it carried weight. Eliza nodded, accepting it for what it was. She sensed he wasn't a man who dressed truth in comforting lies. The road grew rougher as they climbed into higher ground. Snow thickened, swirling around them, and the cold seeped through Eliza's boots. Without a word, Cole removed a blanket from behind the seat and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was practical, not intimate, but it made her eyes sting with sudden tears. She blinked them away, unwilling to cry in front of him. As the hours passed, fatigue settled deep into her bones. Hunger gnawed at her again, dull and persistent. She tried to hide it, but Cole noticed the way she shifted uncomfortably. "There's food waiting," he said quietly. "Not much, but it's warm." That promise carried her through the rest of the journey. When the ranch finally came into view, it was nothing like the grand homestead Eliza had once imagined in her mail-order dreams. The cabin was modest, built of weathered logs with smoke curling from the chimney. A small barn stood nearby, sturdy and well-kept, and beyond it stretched open land, fenced and silent under the snow. Cole helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the cabin. The door opened to a rush of warmth that made Eliza woke slowly, confused by the unfamiliar warmth wrapped around her. For a brief, panicked moment, she thought she had overslept in the boarding house and missed her chance to find work. Then she opened her eyes and saw the soft glow of firelight dancing across wooden walls. The scent of coffee and bread hung in the air, rich and comforting. She was no longer cold. She sat up on the narrow bed near the hearth, a quilt pulled neatly to her chin. Someone had taken off her boots and set them by the fire to dry. The realization startled her. No one had shown her such quiet care in a very long time. Embarrassment flushed her cheeks, followed by a cautious gratitude. Cole was at the table, his back to her, pouring coffee into a tin cup. He turned when he heard her move, his expression calm and unreadable. "You slept hard," he said. "That stew did its job," Eliza nodded, suddenly unsure what to say. She smoothed the borrowed quilt with her hands. "I didn't mean to trouble you," she murmured. "You didn't," Cole replied simply. He slid a plate toward her, bread, eggs, and a small piece of bacon. "You need to eat." She hesitated again, then obeyed, hunger winning out over pride. Each bite felt like strength returning to her body. As she ate, her eyes wandered around the cabin. It was sparse but clean. A rifle hung above the door, shelves held neatly labeled jars, and a single photograph sat near the window, a woman with kind eyes and a shy smile. Eliza looked away, instinctively sensing the story behind it. When she finished, Cole cleared the dishes without comment. "There are some clothes in the trunk by the bed," he said. "They belong to my sister. You can use them while you're here. While you're here." The words both comforted and unsettled her. They reminded her that this kindness came with no promises, no certainty of tomorrow. Still, it was more than she had been given before. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Eliza insisted on helping. She swept the floor, washed dishes, and folded the spare blankets. Cole didn't stop her, but he watched with a thoughtful gaze, as if measuring something he hadn't aimed. She moved carefully, determined not to overstep, afraid that any mistake might send her back out into the cold. By afternoon, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. Cole brought in more firewood, his breath steaming in the air. Eliza noticed the way he favored his left shoulder just slightly and wondered what kind of hardships he carried. Everyone on the frontier bore their own scars, some visible, some not. As dusk fell, Cole spoke again. "You can stay through the winter," he said, as if it were a settled matter. "No pressure to decide anything now. When the snow clears, we'll talk about what you want to do next." Eliza looked up at him, startled. "You'd let me stay that long?" "Yes." Tears welled before she could stop them. She turned away, ashamed of her weakness, but Cole didn't comment. He simply added another log to the fire and gave her the space to gather herself. That night, as Eliza lay listening to the crackle of flames and the distant howl of the wind, she felt something unfamiliar settle over her peace. Not joy, not certainty, but a fragile sense of safety. She was no longer just surviving the hours. She had been given time. And in that quiet gift, something inside her began, slowly, to heal. Winter settled in fully, wrapping the ranch in silence and snow. Days took on a steady rhythm, marked by the rise and fall of the sun, the tending of animals, and the crackle of the fire at night. Eliza found comfort in the predictability. Each morning she rose early, helping where she could, feeding chickens, sweeping the cabin, mending torn cloth by the window where the light was best. Her hands, once soft from limited work back east, grew rougher, stronger. She welcomed the change. Cole never ordered her about, never treated her as though she owed him for her stay. When she helped, it was accepted with a nod of thanks, not expectation. Slowly, an unspoken understanding formed between them. They shared meals, spoke of small things, the weather, the animals, the condition of the fences. It was easier that way, skirting the deeper questions neither seemed ready to ask. One afternoon, Cole returned from town quieter than usual. Eliza noticed it immediately. "Everything all right?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "People talk," he replied, setting his hat on the table. "They always do." It didn't take much for her to understand. A single man living with a young woman who wasn't his wife made for easy gossip. Eliza felt heat rush to her face, a familiar mix of shame and defensiveness rising in her chest. She had done nothing wrong, yet the weight of judgment pressed on her all the same. "I can leave," she said quickly. "I don't want to cause trouble for you." Cole looked at her then, really looked at her. "You're not causing trouble," he said firmly. "And you're not leaving because someone else is uncomfortable." His words steadied her more than he could know. As days passed, Eliza's confidence grew. She discovered she had a gentle way with the animals, especially the skittish Mare that no one else could calm. Cole watched her work, something thoughtful in his eyes. He had lived alone for so long that he hadn't realized how quiet his life had become. Her presence didn't disrupt it, it softened it. One evening, as snow fell thick outside, they sat across from each other at the table, a lantern casting warm light between them. Eliza spoke of her childhood, of sewing by her mother's side and dreaming of a life that felt secure. Cole listened. The letter arrived on a gray morning, its edges damp from melted snow and its seal already broken by the postmaster's careless hand. Cole brought it back from town along with the usual supplies, setting it on the table without comment. Eliza noticed it immediately. Something about the way he avoided her eyes told her it was meant for her. Her name was written across the front in a slanted, unfamiliar hand. A cold heaviness settled in her stomach as she picked it up. She hadn't received a letter since the last hopeful words that had lured her west. For a moment, she considered leaving it unopened, as if ink on paper could not hurt her if she refused to look. But fear had ruled her long enough. She broke the seal. The words inside were sharp and efficient, stripped of kindness. The man who had ordered her sent for her, as he put it, wrote that circumstances had changed. He no longer wished to marry her, but he demanded compensation for the travel costs he had paid. If she did not return to town by the end of the week to settle the matter, he threatened to involve the sheriff. Eliza's hands trembled as she folded the letter. Shame flooded her, hot and familiar. Even now, even after everything, he still claimed ownership over her fate as if she were a misplaced parcel rather than a person. Cole watched her quietly from across the room. "You don't owe him anything," he said, his voice controlled but hard beneath the surface. "He paid for my passage," Eliza whispered. "At least, that's what he claims. I don't have the money." "And if he goes to the sheriff, he won't," Cole interrupted. "And if he tries, he'll have to answer to me." She looked up sharply. "You can't fix this for me," she said, panic edging her voice. "I won't have you dragged into trouble because of my mistakes." Cole stood then, crossing the room in 2 long strides. He placed his hands on the back of the chair, leaning forward just enough that she could see the fierce resolve in his eyes. "This wasn't your mistake," he said quietly. It was his. The certainty in his words nearly broke her. For so long, Eliza had carried the blame alone, believing she deserved what had happened for trusting too easily. Hearing someone else name the truth felt like a door opening where there had only been walls. Still, fear lingered. "What if he comes here?" she asked. "What if he forces the matter?" "Then he'll leave disappointed," Cole replied. "You're not property. You're not bound to him by ink or coin." That night, the wind howled louder than usual, rattling the cabin walls. Eliza lay awake, staring into the darkness, the letter folded beneath her pillow like a threat she couldn't escape. She thought of the road back to town, of standing alone before a man who had already proven how easily he could discard her. The idea hollowed her out. Sometime after midnight, she rose quietly and went to the hearth. Cole was there, seated in the chair, as if he had known sleep would not come easily for either of them. "I don't want to run any more," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how to stand still without being afraid." Cole considered her words carefully. "Standing still doesn't mean standing alone," he said. "Whatever happens, you won't face it by yourself." The admission hung between them, heavier than any promise he had made before. Eliza felt something shift inside her, not relief, not certainty, but courage. Fragile, imperfect courage, born of being seen and defended. By morning, the snow had begun to clear. Eliza folded the letter one last time and placed it in the fire, watching the flames consume the words that had tried to bind her. As ash drifted upward, she made a quiet decision. No matter what came next, she would no longer let someone else decide her worth. And for the first time, she believed she might actually succeed. The storm came in without warning, rolling over the hills like a living thing. By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened to iron gray, and snow fell thick and fast, swallowing the fences and blurring the world beyond the cabin windows. Cole secured the barn and hurried back inside, his coat dusted white, his expression serious. "We're not going anywhere for a day or two," he said. "Roads'll be buried." Eliza nodded, a strange calm settling over her. The storm felt different from the others, not just weather, but a turning point. With the outside world cut off, there was nowhere to hide from the thoughts they had both been avoiding. The wind howled as night fell, rattling the cabin like a challenge. Eliza added wood to the fire while Cole checked the windows and door. When everything was done, they found themselves sitting close to the hearth, the small space forcing a nearness neither commented on. For a long time, they listened to the storm in silence. "I used to think being alone was safer," Cole said suddenly. The word surprised even him. He stared into the flames as if drawing courage from their steady burn. "After my wife died, I figured loving someone was just another way to lose them." Eliza's breath caught. He had never spoken so plainly before. She turned toward him, her voice gentle. "And now?" "And now I'm not so sure," he admitted. Christmas morning arrived quietly, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Sunlight spilled across the snow-covered land, turning the drifts into fields of silver. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low and steady, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Eliza stood by the table, smoothing the front of her dress, her heart beating faster than the calm morning seemed to warrant. Cole had been awake since before dawn. He moved with purpose, though his thoughts were anything but settled. The storm had passed, but the truth spoken during it lingered, impossible to ignore. He knew now that pretending this was temporary, pretending Eliza was only a guest, was no longer honest. They sat across from each other, sharing a simple meal. For once, neither rushed to fill the silence. "There's something I need to say," Cole began, his voice steady but deliberate. Eliza looked up, bracing herself. "What happened to you before being left, treated like you didn't matter, that won't happen here." "Not while I have a say." Her throat tightened. "I know," she said. "You've already proven that." He reached into his coat pocket and set a small pouch on the table. Inside were a few coins, modest but carefully counted. "If you want to leave," he continued, "this will help you get started somewhere new. You don't owe me anything." "You never did." Eliza stared at the pouch, then slowly pushed it back toward him. "I don't want to run," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "Not from fear. Not from hope either." She met his gaze, courage steadying her spine. "When you told me to get up and come home, you didn't promise me anything except safety. And somehow that meant more than all the pretty words I was ever sent." Cole swallowed, emotion flickering across his face. "I'm not good with promises," he admitted. "But if you choose to stay, I'd want it to be because you want a life here. With me." Eliza stood then, the decision already made in her heart. "I choose that," she said simply. "I choose to stay. I choose this place. And if you'll have me, I choose you." For a long moment, neither moved. Then Cole rose, slowly, as if afraid the moment might break. He didn't take her hands right away. Instead, he asked the question that mattered most. "Are you sure?" Eliza nodded, tears shining but unfallen. "For the first time in my life, I am." He stepped forward then, resting his forehead lightly against hers, a gesture more intimate than any grand declaration. "Then you're home," he said. Outside, distant church bells rang, carried faintly on the winter air. Eliza closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. She wasn't a forgotten bride anymore. She wasn't waiting for someone to choose her. She had chosen for herself. And as Christmas morning unfolded around them, quiet and unassuming, it marked not the end of her journey, but the beginning of a life built on trust, warmth, and a love that had grown not from promises, but from truth. Winter loosened its grip slowly, as it always did on the frontier. Snow melted into soft earth, and the land around the ranch breathed again. With each passing day, the world seemed to open up, as though making room for the life Eliza and Cole were building together. They did not rush anything. There was no sudden wedding, no grand announcement to the town. Instead, there were quiet mornings shared over coffee, evenings spent mending fences side by side, and laughter that came unexpectedly, surprising them both. Love, they discovered, did not need spectacle to be real. When they finally rode into town together, the whispers returned, but they sounded different now. Eliza held her head high, no longer feeling the need to explain herself. Cole stood beside her without hesitation, his presence a clear message. Whatever judgments others carried, they no longer had the power to wound. A small ceremony followed in early spring, simple and sincere. Just a handful of people, a few wild